July 18, 1944, 13:47 hours. 7 kilometers south of Caen, Normandy, France. The afternoon heat turned the interior of the Tiger I into a steel furnace. Inside turret number 231, SS Oberscharführer Michael Wittmann adjusted his throat microphone and peered through the commander's periscope at the hedgerow-divided farmland stretching toward the village of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramenil. The acrid smell of cordite lingered from the morning's engagement, mixing with the odor of sweat, gun oil, and the metallic tang of spent shell casings that littered the turret floor. Outside, the 70-ton beast sat motionless, its 80-caliber main gun trained on a tree line 800 meters distant. Wittmann's crew had been fighting continuously for 6 weeks since the Allied landings, and every man bore the exhaustion of sustained combat, faces blackened with oil and smoke, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, hands that trembled slightly when not gripping controls or loading shells. Yet they maintained confidence bordering on invincibility. They were Tiger crewmen. They operated the most powerful tank in the world. Protected by armor no Allied weapon could penetrate at range. Armed with a gun that could destroy any enemy vehicle before it came within effective firing distance. Wittmann had earned his reputation through demonstrated supremacy. His Tiger had destroyed over 130 Allied tanks and assault guns in 2 years of combat on the Eastern Front, and now in Normandy. The numbers were documented, witnessed, and celebrated in Wehrmacht communiqué. The Tiger, I was a weapon of psychological warfare as much as physical destruction. Its mere presence caused Allied tank crews to hesitate, to seek alternatives, to call for air support rather than engage directly. The armor was supposedly impenetrable, 100 millimeters thick on the frontal hull, sloped slightly, hardened steel that had deflected dozens of hits from Soviet 76mm guns and British 75mm guns without penetrating. The 80mm main gun was legendary, originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon adapted for anti-tank use and capable of penetrating any Allied tank's armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. German tankers called it the 88, with the same reverence infantrymen reserved for talking about guardian angels. Inside a Tiger, a crew felt untouchable. Through the periscope, Wittmann observed movement, dust rising from the road network south of the British positions. Intelligence had reported enemy armor concentrations in this sector. Cromwell cruiser tanks, Sherman medium tanks, some specialized variants with unfamiliar profiles. He estimated distances, calculated firing solutions, and prepared to engage when the enemy entered his kill zone. The Tiger's advantages were range and armor. Let them approach. Let them believe they had a chance. Then demonstrate, as he had demonstrated 100 times before, that German steel and German gunnery were supreme. The 88mm shell sitting in the breech weighed 23 pounds, traveled at over 2,000 feet per second, and carried kinetic energy sufficient to punch through armor like paper. One shot, one kill. This was the Tiger's doctrine, and it had proven itself from Kursk to Normandy, but 300 meters to his right, concealed in the shadow of a destroyed farm building. An American M4 Sherman, mounting a 76mm high-velocity gun, tracked the Tiger's position. The crew, veterans of the fighting through the bocage, had learned caution through experience. They had lost 2 Shermans to Tigers in the past week, both destroyed at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, both burning wrecks before their crews could react. The American commander, Lieutenant James Morrison, understood his tank was outmatched in gun and armor. But he also understood something the Tiger crew did not, that American metallurgy had improved, that new ammunition had been distributed, and that the 76mm gun-firing M93 armor-piercing shells could, under specific conditions, penetrate Tiger armor. The conditions were specific. Range under 700 meters, angle of impact close to perpendicular, targeting weak points or side armor rather than the frontal glacis. These were constraints, but they were achievable constraints. Morrison waited, hand on the turret traverse control. watching the Tiger's position, calculating the moment when circumstances would align. The sound came first, the sharp, percussive crack of a high-velocity gun firing. Different from the deeper boom of the 88mm, higher pitched, almost a shriek, then impact. The 76mm shell struck Tiger 231's right side armor at the junction between turret and hull, the point where 100mm of vertical plate met the 80mm side armor. The shell, traveling at 2,700 feet per second, contained a hardened steel penetrator surrounded by a softer driving band. Upon impact, the driving band stripped away, while the penetrator punched through the armor plate. The steel superheating from friction, the kinetic energy so concentrated that molecular bonds in the armor broke and the plate failed. The shell penetrated, fragmenting as it entered the crew compartment, sending steel shards ricocheting through the interior at supersonic velocity. The fragments struck stored ammunition, fuel cans, hydraulic lines, and crew. Michael Whitman died instantly, struck by shrapnel that severed his spine and punctured both lungs. His gunner died 2 seconds later when secondary explosions ignited the ammunition stored in the turret. The loader, attempting to escape through the turret hatch, was killed by a second 76mm shell that struck the turret ring. The driver and radio operator, trapped in the forward hull, died when fuel lines ruptured and fire consumed the crew compartment. Tiger 231 did not explode dramatically. It simply stopped, smoke pouring from every hatch and vision port. The internal fire consuming everything flammable and cooking off stored ammunition in sporadic secondary explosions that continued for 10 minutes. The Impenetrable had been penetrated. The Invincible had been killed. And across Normandy and dozens of similar engagements, German tankers learned what Michael Whitman learned in the last instant of his life, that the certainty they had operated under was a lie, that American industry had solved the problem of German armor, and that the technological superiority they had depended upon had evaporated. The Tiger I was born from Germany's experience on the Eastern Front. In 1941, when Wehrmacht forces invaded the Soviet Union, they encountered the T-34 medium tank, a vehicle whose combination of armor, firepower, and mobility shocked German tank crews accustomed to facing lighter French and British tanks. The T-34's sloped armor deflected German anti-tank shells. Its 76mm gun destroyed German Panzer III's and IVs with ease. Its wide tracks gave it mobility in mud and snow that German tanks could not match. The psychological impact was profound. German tankers who had dominated Poland and France suddenly faced an enemy whose tanks were superior. Field reports demanded immediate response. German industry accelerated development of heavy tanks capable of defeating Soviet armor. The result was the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger Verse, which entered production in August 1942. The design prioritized armor protection and firepower over mobility. The frontal armor was 100mm thick, vertical rather than sloped, but thick enough that Soviet 76mm guns could not penetrate at normal combat ranges. The 88mm KWK-36 L-56 main gun was adapted from the famous Flak 88 anti-aircraft gun that had proven devastatingly effective in anti-tank roles in North Africa. The combination created a tank that could engage and destroy enemy armor at ranges where return fire was ineffective. The Tiger's combat debut on the Eastern Front in late 1942 was successful. Soviet tanks were destroyed at distances exceeding 1,500 meters. Soviet anti-tank guns proved inadequate. The Tiger's reputation grew with each engagement, but the Tiger was expensive, complex, and slow to produce. Each tank required over 300,000 man-hours to manufacture. The interleaved road wheel suspension, while providing superior ride quality, was prone to jamming with mud and debris. The Maybach HL-230 engine was underpowered for the tank's 70-ton weight, resulting in mechanical breakdowns and limited operational range. Only one 3 and 47 Tiger Is were produced during the entire war, compared to over 50,000 American M4 Shermans and 57,000 Soviet T-34s. The Tiger was a qualitative weapon in a war that increasingly demanded quantity. German doctrine attempted to compensate by concentrating Tigers in heavy tank battalions that operated as mobile reserves, deployed to critical sectors to destroy enemy breakthroughs. The strategy worked when Tigers could engage at range, but Normandy's terrain, hedgerows, villages, close quarters, negated that advantage. By July 1944, the Tiger's reputation exceeded its actual capabilities. German propaganda had inflated the tank into a symbol of German technological superiority. Newsreels showed Tigers crushing Allied vehicles, and communiques reported destruction ratios of 10-1 or better. Allied soldiers called them Tiger fear, the psychological impact of facing a weapon believed to be invincible. American and British tank crews learned to avoid direct engagements, to call for air support, to seek numerical advantages. The Tiger became more than a tank. It became a myth. And like all myths, it was vulnerable to reality. American tank development followed a different philosophy. The M4 Sherman, which entered production in 1942, was designed for mass production, mechanical reliability, and ease of operation. The armor was adequate, 50 millimeters on the frontal hull, 38 millimeters on the sides, sufficient to defeat German anti-tank guns at range but insufficient to withstand hits from the 88-meter gun or the 75-meter guns, mounted on later model Panzer V's and Panthers. The original 75mm M3 gun was adequate against German tanks in North Africa, but increasingly outmatched as German armor improved. The Sherman's advantages were quantity, reliability, and logistical supportability. It could be produced rapidly, over 8,000, manufactured in 1943 alone, shipped across the Atlantic in vast numbers, and maintained by crews with moderate technical training. The Sherman was not a technological marvel. It was an industrial product, and industrial products win wars of attrition. But American tankers dying in Normandy did not care about production statistics. They cared about survival, and survival against Tigers required better guns. The 75mm M3 could not penetrate Tiger frontal armor at any range. Side shots at close range might penetrate, but achieving those shots required exposing oneself to the Tiger's 88 meters, which meant death. American tank crews developed tactics, flanking maneuvers, using terrain for cover, coordinating attacks with multiple tanks to overwhelm a single Tiger. But tactics that worked on paper resulted in burned-out Shermans and dead crews in practice. The disparity created resentment. Why were American tankers sent into combat in tanks that could not effectively fight the enemy's best weapons? The answer was already being manufactured. In early 1944, the U.S. Army began receiving M4 Shermans fitted with the 76mm M1A1 high-velocity gun. The gun represented significant improvement over the 75mm, longer barrel, higher muzzle velocity, and critically, the ability to fire improved armor-piercing ammunition. The M93 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap, APCBC round, could penetrate 4 inches of armor at 500 meters, sufficient to defeat Tiger side armor and, under optimal conditions, frontal armor at close range. The 76mm Sherman was not equal to the Tiger in a direct frontal engagement at range, but it reduced the disparity from insurmountable to manageable. Combined with numerical superiority, 5 Shermans for every Tiger, the balance shifted. German intelligence was aware of the 76mm gun, but underestimated its effectiveness. Reports noted its appearance, but concluded it posed no fundamental threat to Tiger armor. This assessment was based on the assumption that Allied metallurgy and ammunition design were inferior to German standards. The assumption was wrong. American metallurgical research had advanced significantly, driven by industrial cooperation between military arsenals and private companies. The M93 rounds penetrator was manufactured using improved steel alloys and heat treatment processes that increased hardness without increasing brittleness. The result was a projectile that could defeat armor previously considered impenetrable. German tankers, operating under outdated intelligence and doctrinal confidence, entered engagements unaware that the rules had changed. The emotional contrast between expectation and experience was violent and disorienting. German Tiger crews expected to dominate the battlefield. They expected to engage Allied tanks at range, destroy them before receiving effective return fire, and withdraw without damage. This expectation was grounded in 2 years of experience on the Eastern Front, where Tigers had been virtually immune to Soviet tank guns at combat ranges. The few Tigers lost had been destroyed by overwhelming numbers, mechanical breakdowns, or deliberate abandonment during retreats, not by being penetrated and destroyed in one-on-one engagements. Normandy shattered this expectation. Tigers found themselves operating in terrain that negated their range advantage. Hedgerows limited sightlines to a few hundred meters. Villages and forests provided concealment that allowed Allied tanks to approach unseen. And when engagements occurred at close range, German crews discovered that their armor was not impenetrable. The 76mm shell punching through side armor or turret ring was psychologically devastating. It meant that the fundamental advantage Tigers possessed in vulnerability was conditional rather than absolute. It meant that survival required more than simply being in a Tiger. It required tactics, caution, and recognition that Allied tanks could kill them. One Tiger commander, Hauptmann Kurt Knispel, survived multiple engagements against 76mm armed Shermans and recorded his experiences in a letter written in August 1944. Recovered after his death later that year, "The Americans have new guns. We did not know this until they shot through Hoffmann's Tiger at 600 meters. The round went through the side armor and killed everyone inside. We were told this was impossible. We were told Tiger armor could not be penetrated by American guns. This was a lie, or it is no longer true. The Americans have improved their weapons, and we are learning this through the deaths of our comrades. I do not fear American tankers. They are brave but poorly trained. I fear American industry, which produces weapons faster than we can destroy them and improves them faster than we can respond." Knispel's letter captures the transformation occurring in German tanker consciousness. The realization that technological superiority was transient, that American industrial capacity allowed continuous improvement, and that qualitative advantages could be overcome through quantitative and incremental improvements was psychologically destabilizing. German doctrine had emphasized quality over quantity. Build superior weapons, train superior crews, and dominate through excellence. But excellence required stability. Once the enemy matched or exceeded your weapons' capabilities, excellence alone was insufficient. And American industry, producing 50,000 tanks while Germany produced 25,000, ensured that even temporary German advantages would be overwhelmed by numerical superiority combined with incremental, qualitative improvements. The 76mm shell became the symbolic object in this narrative, a piece of hardened steel, 33 inches long, weighing 15 pounds, unremarkable in appearance but devastating in application. Unlike the Tiger's massive 80mm rounds, the 76mm shell was smaller, lighter, produced in the millions by American factories operating 3 shifts per day. Each shell represented not German craftsmanship or engineering excellence, but American industrial standardization, interchangeable parts, quality control through statistical sampling, and production volumes that made individual shells disposable rather than precious. The 76mm shell was not a wonder weapon. It was a sufficient weapon, produced in sufficient quantities, delivered to crews who used them in sufficient numbers to overcome qualitative disadvantages through quantitative advantages. For German tankers, the 76mm shell represented the materialization of their fears. Each penetration was proof that German superiority was eroding, that American industry was solving problems faster than German industry could create them, and that the war was being decided not by courage or skill, but by production capacity and logistical sustainability. The shell that killed Michael Whitman was one of millions produced. Its loss meant nothing to American logistics. The Tiger it destroyed was one of fewer than 1,500 produced, and its loss was irreplaceable. This asymmetry, American abundance versus German scarcity, defined the war's later stages. The symbolism extended beyond the physical object. The 76mm shell represented the philosophy underlying American military production, that sufficiency, mass-produced, was superior to excellence produced in limited quantities. German industry had pursued perfection. Tigers with thick armor and powerful guns, Panthers with sloped armor and excellent ballistics, weapons that were individually superior to their allied counterparts. But perfection was expensive, time-consuming, and produced in numbers too small to affect strategic outcomes. American industry pursued sufficiency. Shermans that were adequate, produced rapidly, maintained easily, and deployed in overwhelming numbers. When sufficiency improved incrementally, adding a better gun, improving ammunition, it became formidable. And formidable weapons produced in overwhelming quantities became decisive. The tactical implications of the 76mm gun's effectiveness transformed American tank doctrine. Prior to its widespread deployment, American tactics emphasized avoiding direct confrontation with German heavy tanks. Tank destroyers, lightly armored vehicles with powerful guns, were tasked with engaging Tigers and Panthers, while Shermans provided infantry support and exploited breakthroughs. This division of labor was doctrinally sound, but practically problematic. Tank destroyers were often unavailable when needed, and Sherman crews faced Tigers without adequate means to defend themselves. The 76mm gun changed this. While still at a disadvantage in a frontal engagement at range, 76mm armed Shermans could fight Tigers under the right circumstances. This capability restored confidence and enabled more aggressive tactics. American tank commanders developed engagement techniques specifically for fighting Tigers and Panthers with 76mm guns. The tactics emphasized maneuver, coordination, and exploiting weaknesses. A single Sherman engaging a Tiger frontally at range would lose, but three Shermans maneuvering to place one on the Tiger's flank while the others fixed its attention could achieve penetrating hits. The tactics required discipline, communication, and willingness to accept casualties, but they worked. Allied after-action reports from late 1944 document increasing success rates against German heavy tanks. Tigers were still dangerous, still capable of destroying multiple Shermans before being knocked out, but they were no longer invincible. The psychological impact on German crews was profound. Captured German tankers, interrogated about their experiences, consistently expressed shock at being penetrated by American guns they had been told were inadequate. One interrogation report from September 1944, preserved in U.S. Army archives, records a Tiger commander's testimony. "We were told the Americans had only the short-barreled 75mm gun that could not harm us. When we were hit and penetrated, I believed initially that we had been struck by British 17-pounder guns, which we knew could penetrate our armor. Only after capture, when I saw the American tank that destroyed us, did I understand they had improved their guns. No one had informed us of this. We entered combat with outdated intelligence and paid the price. My crew is dead because our commanders did not know or did not tell us that the Americans had weapons capable of killing us. The interrogation reveals the systemic failure in German intelligence and command structures. Information about Allied weapons improvements was either not collected, not disseminated, or not believed. The institutional culture that had created the Tiger's invincibility myth could not adapt quickly enough to acknowledge its obsolescence. Crews continued operating under assumptions that were no longer valid, and they died because of those assumptions. The contrast with American intelligence and adaptation was stark. When German weapons improved, the Panther tank, the Tiger II, improved anti-tank guns. American forces analyzed them, developed countermeasures, and disseminated information rapidly. The system was responsive, flexible, and grounded in reality rather than ideology. The production figures tell their own story. By the end of 1944, over 15,000 M4 Shermans armed with 76 6-meter guns had been produced and deployed to European and Pacific theaters. This was more than 10 times the total number of Tigers produced during the entire war. Even accounting for losses, and Sherman losses were substantial, the numerical advantage was overwhelming. German heavy tank battalions faced situations where destroying 5 or even 10 Shermans did not reduce the threat because 15 more appeared the next day. The mathematics of attrition favored the side that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. German industry attempted to respond. The Tiger II, or King Tiger, entered production in late 1944 with thicker armor and a more powerful 80mm gun. But only 492 were produced before war's end. Too few, too late, and mechanically even less reliable than the Tiger Y. The Panther tank, produced in larger numbers, over 6,000, was an excellent design, but still insufficient to offset Allied numerical superiority. And both vehicles suffered from the same fundamental problems plaguing all German late-war production: resource shortages, Allied bombing of factories, fuel scarcity, and the collapse of transportation networks that prevented delivery of completed vehicles to frontline units. Germany could still produce quality weapons, but it could not produce them in quantities that mattered strategically. The economic dimension of the conflict was inescapable. The United States in 1944 was producing more military equipment than all Axis powers combined, while simultaneously maintaining civilian production levels that kept the home front prosperous. German civilians in 1944 were experiencing shortages of everything: food, clothing, fuel, housing. The contrast was visible to German soldiers who captured American supply dumps and found abundance that seemed almost wasteful. Extra clothing, extra rations, replacement parts in quantities that seemed excessive. One German report on captured American supplies noted with bewilderment, "This enemy discards items we would repair and reuse. They possess spare parts in such quantities that replacement is preferred to repair. This suggests industrial capacity we cannot comprehend or match." The psychological transformation in German tanker morale accelerated through late 1944. The confidence that had characterized Tiger crews in 1943, the belief that they were operating the best tank in the world, that they were virtually invulnerable, eroded under the weight of evidence. Tigers were being destroyed, not occasionally but regularly. Crews were being killed by weapons they had been told could not harm them. And the material superiority that had justified German sacrifices, the belief that superior technology would compensate for numerical disadvantages, was revealed as insufficient. Morale collapse in Tiger units mirrored the broader collapse in Wehrmacht morale as the strategic situation deteriorated. Letters home from German tankers in late 1944 reflect this transformation. One letter, written by a Tiger driver in November 1944, intercepted by Allied intelligence, reads, "We have lost 6 Tigers this month, 3 to enemy tanks, 2 to mechanical breakdowns we could not repair for lack of parts, 1 abandoned when we ran out of fuel. The Americans do not seem to lose tanks. When we destroy 1, 2 more appear. They are everywhere and we are nowhere. I do not believe we can win. I do not believe our weapons are sufficient. I believe we are being sacrificed for a cause already lost." The letter's despair is representative. By late 1944, German tankers understood that individual excellence and superior technology were insufficient when the enemy possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and continuously improving weapons. The Tiger's technological advantage had been temporary, and its psychological advantage had evaporated. What remained was a heavy, fuel-consuming, maintenance-intensive vehicle that was difficult to transport, prone to breakdown, and vulnerable to weapons that had not existed 2 years earlier. The Tiger had become a liability, a symbol of German inflexibility and inability to adapt to industrial warfare's realities. American tankers, by contrast, experienced a different transformation. The arrival of 76mm guns restored confidence that had been shaken by early encounters with Tigers and Panthers. While American crews never achieved the same level of individual tank superiority, the Tiger II and Panther remained superior in one-on-one engagements. They no longer felt helpless. The 76mm gun provided a fighting chance, and in warfare, the perception of capability matters as much as actual capability. Crews who believed they could fight Tigers engaged them more aggressively. Aggressive tactics created opportunities for flanking shots and close-range engagements where the 76mm was most effective. The psychological shift enabled tactical success, which reinforced confidence in a virtuous cycle. One American tank commander, interviewed for an Army oral history project in 1945, described the difference. When we had the 75, we avoided Tigers whenever possible. We called for air support or artillery or tried to bypass them. When we got the 76, we still avoided frontal engagements at range. We weren't stupid, but we would fight them if we had to. And once you've killed a Tiger, you realize it's just a tank. A good tank, a dangerous tank, but a tank. It can be destroyed. That knowledge changes everything. We stopped being afraid and started being aggressive, and aggression wins tank battles. The commander's testimony highlights the role of morale and confidence in combat effectiveness. The 76mm gun's actual performance mattered less than the fact that crews believed it gave them a chance. That belief enabled aggressive tactics, and aggressive tactics created tactical successes, which validated the belief. The Germans experienced the opposite cycle. Defeats eroded confidence, which led to caution, which reduced tactical effectiveness, which led to more defeats. By early 1945, German tank crews were often reluctant to engage, preferring to withdraw rather than risk combat. This was rational given their situation. Fuel and ammunition were scarce, replacements non-existent, and strategic circumstances hopeless. But it meant that German armor, which had once been the spearhead of offensives, became passive and reactive. The Battle of the Bulge, in December 1944, provided the final demonstration of the Tiger's obsolescence. Germany's last major offensive in the West committed nearly 100 Tigers and King Tigers to break through American lines in the Ardennes. The offensive initially succeeded through surprise and concentration of force, but it stalled within days due to fuel shortages, stiffening American resistance, and clearing weather that allowed Allied air attacks. Tigers destroyed numerous American tanks during the offensive, but they also suffered unsustainable losses. Accurate loss figures are disputed, but at least 30 Tigers were destroyed or abandoned during the battle, losses that could not be replaced. The offensive failed not because German tankers lacked skill or courage, but because the logistical and industrial foundations necessary to sustain operations did not exist. American forces defending the Ardennes included numerous 76mm armed Shermans, tank destroyers with 90mm guns, and improved anti-tank weapons. German Tigers achieved tactical successes, individual tanks destroying multiple opponents, but these successes did not translate into operational or strategic advantage. The offensive consumed Germany's remaining mobile reserves and achieved nothing permanent. By January 1945, German forces were retreating, abandoning disabled vehicles for lack of fuel and spare parts, and facing American counterattacks supported by overwhelming material superiority. One German Tiger commander, captured during the Ardennes retreat, was asked during interrogation why the offensive failed. His response, recorded in an intelligence summary, was succinct. "We ran out of fuel, we ran out of time, and we were overwhelmed by enemies who had everything we lacked. We destroyed their tanks, and they brought more tanks. We destroyed their trucks, and they brought more trucks. We killed their soldiers, and they brought more soldiers. We had skill and courage and better weapons, but they had everything else. Skill is not enough when the enemy has industry." The epilogue of the Tiger's story is written in the wreckage scattered across Western Europe. Nearly 600 Tigers were lost on the Western Front, destroyed, captured, or abandoned between June 1944 and May 1945. Many were destroyed by the very weapons German doctrine insisted could not harm them. The 76mm shell, produced in millions, fired by adequately trained crews operating mass-produced tanks, proved sufficient to defeat armor designed to be invincible. The lesson was clear. Invincibility is contextual, temporary, and vulnerable to industrial innovation applied at scale. The symbolic meaning of the 76mm shell transcends its tactical effectiveness. It represents the principle that problems can be solved through systematic application of resources, that qualitative advantages can be overcome through quantitative mass combined with incremental improvement, and that industrial democracies possess inherent advantages in sustained conflicts. Nazi ideology had emphasized willpower, racial superiority, and technological excellence as decisive factors. American practice emphasized production capacity, logistical sustainability, and continuous improvement. History rendered judgment. To stand today in the tank museums that preserve Tigers, mechanical monuments to German engineering, is to observe weapons that inspire awe for their design and pity for the crews who operated them. The Tigers were well designed, powerfully armed, and heavily armored. They were also too few, too expensive, too complex, and too inflexible to achieve strategic impact. The Shermans displayed nearby, mass-produced, mechanically simple, adequate rather than excellent, won the war not because they were superior tanks, but because they were sufficient tanks produced in sufficient numbers to overwhelm opponents. The 76mm shell that killed Michael Wittmann on July 18, 1944, was one of millions fired during the war. Its expenditure was routine, its loss irrelevant to American logistics. The Tiger it destroyed was irreplaceable, a scarce resource whose loss degraded German combat power permanently. This asymmetry defined the war's material dimension. America could afford to expend resources lavishly because abundance was its strategic advantage. Germany, operating under scarcity, could not afford losses, but suffered them anyway. The lesson extends beyond World War II into the nature of technological competition and industrial warfare. Superior individual weapons do not guarantee victory when the enemy possesses superior production capacity and system-level advantages. The side that can produce adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities, improve them continuously, and sustain their deployment indefinitely possesses advantages that qualitative superiority cannot overcome. This was true in World War II, and it remains true in contemporary conflicts, where industrial capacity, technological adaptability, and logistical sustainability determine outcomes. For the German tankers who died inside Tigers, penetrated by 76mm shells, the lesson came too late. They had believed in their armor's invincibility because doctrine and propaganda had assured them it was so. They had operated under the assumption that technological superiority was permanent because their experience confirmed it, and they died when those assumptions proved false, not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they fought for a system that prioritized ideology over adaptation, propaganda over intelligence, and qualitative excellence over quantitative sufficiency. The 70 shell, unremarkable in appearance, represented the alternative philosophy, that problems are solved through engineering, that advantages are temporary, and that continuous improvement applied systematically will eventually overcome static superiority. The shell was not a wonder weapon. It was an adequate weapon that became formidable through mass production, intelligent application, and integration into a system that valued results over rhetoric. The Tiger's armor was never truly impenetrable. It was merely impenetrable until it wasn't. The moment American industry solved the problem of penetration, the Tiger's primary advantage evaporated. German tankers discovered this through the most direct means possible, by being penetrated, by watching their comrades die, and by understanding, in their final moments, that the certainty they had relied upon was conditional and temporary. The steel that had protected them failed, because steel, however thick, is vulnerable to harder steel traveling faster. And America possessed the industrial capacity to produce that harder steel, that faster projectile, and the millions of shells necessary to deliver it wherever German armor appeared. In the end, the Tiger's story is a story about the limits of excellence in the face of systematic adequacy. The tank was excellent, superbly engineered, powerfully armed, heavily protected. But excellence without the industrial and logistical support to sustain it becomes irrelevant. The Sherman was adequate, sufficiently armed, sufficiently protected, sufficiently mobile, but adequacy supported by overwhelming production, continuous improvement, and logistical sustainability becomes dominant. The 76mm shell punching through Tiger armor was the physical manifestation of this principle, the moment when ideology confronted reality and reality prevailed. The German tankers who experienced this confrontation learned what their commanders refused to acknowledge, that the war was not being decided by superior weapons or superior warriors, but by superior systems. And in a war of systems, the side that could produce more, sustain longer, and adapt faster would win regardless of individual tactical superiority. The 70 shell proved this truth one penetration at a time, until the Tigers were gone, the crews were dead, and the myth of invincibility was shattered forever in the wreckage of 1,000 burned-out hulks scattered across Europe. The sound that echoed across Normandy in the summer of 1944, the sharp crack of the 76mm gun firing, distinct from the deeper boom of the 88mm, was the sound of technological paradigms shifting, of industrial capacity overwhelming martial excellence, and of a democracy's productive power defeating a dictatorship's ideological certainty. It was the sound of the future. And for the German tankers who heard it in their final moments, it was the sound of everything they had believed, proven false by 15 pounds of hardened steel traveling 2,700 feet per second through armor that was supposed to be, but never truly was, impenetrable.